Hi, everyone. Welcome to Authors at Google. I'm really excited to introduce Chris Guillebeau today. Chris is an author, blogger, an all-around awesome human being. He wrote the book, The Art of Non-Conformity, and has a really popular blog of the same name. Chris describes himself as a writer, traveler, entrepreneur, and general nonconformist. And he's on a mission to visit every country in the world before he turns 35. So he's currently visited about 151 countries, has 49 to go, and is also running his book tour in similar audacious fashion, he is visiting all 50 US states in a span of about 2.5 months, as well as 10 Canadian provinces. Chris's goals are to help people live unconventional lives, make their own choices, and change the world. I know I've been personally very inspired by Chris and his work, so without further ado, Chris Guillebeau.
Thanks so much. That was great. Thank you so much. Thanks, Jenny. That was wonderful. The one thing Jenny didn't mention is that she's an author herself, and her book is coming out, Life After College, in spring of next year, so I'm really excited about that. And thanks for your help organizing this. Thanks, Candace, for the posters, and thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks for welcoming me to the Googleplex. So I am psyched. It is an unconventional book tour, so because of that, I don't want to lecture for an hour. I'm sure you don't want that either. And I'm also going to assume that everyone here is literate, so I won't read to you from the book. If you want to read the book, you can do so. That's great. If not, that's fine too. This is stop number 46 of the Unconventional Book Tour. It's been so much fun to go all over the country and talk to fun people about nonconformity and unconventional life and work of different forms. So what I thought I'd do is I'll talk for about 15-20 minutes. I'll tell you a little bit about the book. I'll tell you why I wrote it and what I hope will come of it, and a couple things that are happening with Art of Non-Conformity in general. And then we'll do what I call questions and attempted answers for about 15 minutes or so. So sometimes that goes better than others, but here I'm sure it's going to be great. At least we'll have great questions. And then we'll just hang out, and I'll be in the back after that to sign books for anybody who wants that. And normally I encourage people to bring cupcakes, but here at the Googleplex, that doesn't seem to be an issue. So again, we'll just hang out, and I'm so glad you're here. Quick audience survey. How many of you have blogs of your own? Okay. And how many of you use Twitter? Awesome. Okay, about a third with blogs, about 50% Twitter. Nice. So the first question that often comes up these days, why bother writing a book? Like, what's the point? Because we live in this beautiful digital age where, you know, we can get information out to people immediately. We can go tonight and write a blog post about what happens here today, and no one's going to tell us what to say. We have no editors, there's no gatekeeper, and we can get that message out to tens of thousands or more people. And if we want instant feedback, we can get that with Twitter, Facebook, site comments, etc. And I think it's all wonderful, but it also begs the question, why bother writing a book? Because a book is almost the opposite of that process. A book takes forever. The publishing life cycle takes a year or more. I wrote this book last year. It just came out 2 months ago. You have to give up control. You know, there's no guarantee of success, et cetera. And so I was thinking about this as I was going through the writing process and getting ready to, you know, publish the book. And I realized that, you know, for me, I was always a big reader, and I grew up reading books, and books were something that were very special to me. And, you know, I guess I could think of probably 5 to 10 books at least that I had read as a child or a teenager, as an adult, that had really changed my life, that had really made a big impact or a big difference, you know. And after I read the book, I was a different person, or I made decisions differently. And I couldn't really think of a lot of blog posts that have changed my life. And I certainly couldn't think of any tweets that changed my life. You know, just reading through the tweet deck and like, wow, I'm a different person. Couldn't think of anything like that. So I think Twitter is great for gathering people together. Been doing this unconventional book tour, and at each stop along the way, you know, Twitter, Facebook, all those things have been fantastic in bringing people out. I think it's also good for making connections and sharing information and all kinds of things. But I also think that a lot of digital communication is fleeting. And a lot of it just kind of goes out there, and then we move on to the next thing.
There we go.
We're working now.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to talk to you.
All right. I guess we're going to keep going. Great. So a lot of communication goes out there, and if you have a blog of your own, you probably know that your archives are almost never read. You know, it's mostly only your current posts. 90% of the traffic is going to your most recent posts. And so, you know, I guess I still believe that books at least have the potential to be a little bit longer lasting, to make a little bit more of an impact, you know, to be something with a longer timeline, at least a different format. And it's not for me to say whether this book will change anyone's life or not. That's for other people to judge. But I also think it's good to have a goal, and it's good to define your own success. And if you're going to, you know, undertake a big project, you might as well decide for yourself what success is going to look like. And so in my case with this book, you know, my hope with the Art of Non-Conformity book is that people will read it and say not only it was a good book, but hopefully say, you know, I read this book and then I thought differently about some things. And I went and made some changes, you know, or I made some different decisions. So really the goal is to inspire people to take action, to create positive change, for whatever positive change, you know, looks like in their lives. And so I use this, I like to frame the whole question around something that Gretchen Rubin said. And Gretchen is the author of the Happiness Project book and blog, and she's been a good friend and mentor to me. And so on the first page of the book, Gretchen asked this question. And the question is, in the face of relentless pressure to conform and pressure to avoid risks, how do we craft the life of our dreams? Or another way to put it is, how do we live a remarkable life in a conventional world? So that's the central question of the book. And I use this analogy in the prologue of jumping off the bridge, or bridge jumping. So bridge jumping comes from this experience you might have had when you were a kid, and you wanted to do something that you probably shouldn't do, and your parent or your teacher or some authority figure, you know, said, Jenny, why do you want to do that? And she said, oh, you know, because Candace is doing it, because Tim is doing it. And they said to her, if everyone else jumped off the bridge, would you? So then she's a little bit disappointed, but she realizes, hopefully, maybe it's good advice, which is all fine and well. But then we grow up, and the situation changes, kind of reverses itself. And we look around, and we see that many of our peers are making the same kind of decisions. And many of our peers are kind of, you know, on one narrow path and doing the same kind of things in terms of their education, their career, their relationships, how they think about money and debt, you know, all kinds of things. And if we want to do something different, you know, if we have an idea, you know, maybe to take the road not taken, or even make our own road, even if it's not something that's confrontational, even if it's not opposed to someone else, then we often encounter this resistance. And we encounter this pressure to conform that Gretchen talked about, or this pressure to avoid risks. And so it's almost like everyone's asking us the opposite question. It's almost like everyone's saying, you know, everyone else is jumping off the bridge. Why aren't you? You know, what's wrong with you? And so the one sentence statement of why I wrote the book is to bring the childhood message up to adulthood application, and to say, you don't have to live your life the way other people expect you to, and you can do good things for yourself and for others at the same time. It's not a false choice. It's not a dichotomy. And here are the stories of a number of people who've done that in different ways. So, you know, I wrote the book. There's a number of stories about me, and some people will relate to those stories and others won't, and that's okay. But then there's stories of other people, you know, who have somehow, you know, overcome the pressure to conform and pursued an unconventional choice, you know, of their own. So, for example, there's a story of Susan Lewis, who's from Dallas, Texas. And Susan wanted to make a career change. She didn't actually want to be an entrepreneur. She wanted to be a part of a company or an organization, you know, bigger than herself. But she realized, you know, any job I apply for, there's probably going to be 100 other people, at least, applying for this job. And maybe on paper, they look as good as I do. So, you know, how can I get around this situation? How can I circumvent the HR process? And so instead of, you know, sending out 300 emails with her resume attached, you know, in hopes that one company would call her back, Susan created a website called SusanHiresABoss.com and put her portfolio online and said, you know, here's who I am and here's what I've done. And most importantly, here's what I would like to do, you know, for the right company or organization. And I am interviewing prospective bosses. If you'd like to be considered, fill out this form. So of course that's very audacious, especially at the height of the economic crisis when unemployment was 12 to 14% in Texas. But Susan did this, and she got a lot of attention for it, and she got 12 to 14 good job offers from companies all over North America. And the company that she ended up going to work for, or the boss that she hired, to use her language, was not actually planning on expanding the organization until he heard about Susan's project. And he was just really impressed, with her initiative. And he said, I have to make room in my organization for someone like Susan. There's also a story of a guy named Alan Bacon. And Alan was a self-described, conventional guy with a traditional job and a family, middle-aged. And Alan was happy with many parts of his life, but he was also discontented and thinking about making some change. But he realized, I can't make a really, really big change. I can't just leave everything behind and move to Thailand like some people do. That's great that some people can do that, but I can't. So what Alan did instead was he created what he called a series of life experiments. And the life experiments began with really small things like going to the art museum during his lunch break. So, every day he drove to work and he passed this art museum and he had never been inside. So one day, he went inside. And then he took up photography, which was a hobby he had always been interested in but had never really pursued. So he, bought a camera, took a class. Then he started doing some traveling. He started doing some business travel he hadn't done before. He went overseas to Europe for the first time, and he found out that he had to go back to France for about 3 weeks. And instead of going back by himself, he found a way to bring his family with him. So his wife and their 3 young daughters, went to France for a 3-week cross-cultural, immersion experience. Talked about what a good decision that was for the family. And then Alan started consulting, and now he's completely self-employed. And he traces the whole process, to the early idea of the life experiments, to just, being willing to kind of experiment with change, to see change as something, welcoming, instead of something fearful. So the story of Susan, the story of Alan, a number of other people in the book, again, with the goal of inspiring readers to take action, to create positive change, to take action to, maybe step back from the bridge and take a different look and see, how can I pursue my own unconventional life? And so, when we talk about things like change, when we talk about nonconformity, unconventional living, all these kind of things, it's good to mention that these are not things that everyone cares about, and not everyone's interested in change, and not everyone wants to live unconventionally, and that's okay. So I get a lot of emails, and from time to time people will write in and say, I have a very traditional life, what do you have against me? And it gives me a great opportunity to say I have nothing against you, and I wish you well, and that's great. I'm so glad you're happy. The problem is that a lot of other people are not happy with that, and maybe not so much unhappy, but I would say a lot of people are discontented, and a lot of people are dissatisfied, with the idea of doing things the way they've always been done. And so, in many ways, the fundamental message of the Art of Non-Conformity, the whole project, is really for the discontented. It's a self-selecting group of people who do want to do something different. And for those of us who find ourselves in that group, or for people who identify with that and say, yes, I do want to kind of, pursue the road not taken or make my own road. I've been doing these meetups all across the country. San Francisco is number 46. And out of all these conversations, I've developed just 2 suggestions. So 2 suggestions, for those of us who find ourselves in that group. The first suggestion is that these days there is a lot of conversation about efficiency, about how to be the most efficient person or the most productive, or how to live the most optimal life, how to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and read your 60 RSS feeds by 6 a.m., or how to kind of outsource your life and get other people to do things for you so that you can detach yourself from humanity. And I think that's a little bit overrated. And my response to that would be the same as with the other people. I would say if that works for you, that's great. If that rocks your world, wonderful. But for those of us who might be a little bit uncomfortable with that, or for those of us who might wonder, is that it? Is that the answer? I would say that there's an alternative. And the alternative to pursuing efficiency for efficiency's sake is to pursue meaningful adventure. So things like, in my case, visiting every country in the world. For those of you who read the blog, it's a highly inefficient quest. I spend a lot of time and money and energy sorting out plane tickets and logistics and visas and sleeping on the floor of the airport, all over the world, and getting kicked out of various countries. And it's all very inefficient. And in many ways, my life would be much easier if I just didn't do that. If I just lived at home in Portland, Oregon, or maybe traveled around the States, maybe traveled once a year. But I don't do it because it's efficient or productive. I do it because it's meaningful. It brings personal joy to me. That's why I do it. Another example would be this book tour itself. About 90 days before the book came out, I talked to my publisher, and I said, hey guys, what's the plan for the book tour? Where am I going? And they said, oh, we don't have any money for that, and we don't really believe in book tours anymore, and most authors don't really want to do them anyway. They said, you can come to New York if you want. And I said, well, New York is great, but not everyone lives there. So I just decided, if there's no official book tour, well, that's okay. I'll make my own. And I don't want to do anything small. So I don't want to only do major markets. So that's how the whole 50-state thing came about. And I didn't want to leave out Canada, so all the provinces up there. And I just figured it's not only me, it's all of my great readers. I have great readers all over the country, and we'll just make this happen. And we'll find a way to do it, however we can do it. And it's been so fantastic. It's been so much fun, so rewarding, so meaningful. And it's great that I can go to places and have great crowds. It's great that I can come here to Google. But some of the smaller stops, in many ways, have actually been more meaningful. To go to a place like North Dakota, where there's 9 people, until a few days before I went to West Virginia, there was only one person on the sign-up list, and her name was Nancy. And so I wrote to her and said, Nancy, you have to be there. You can't get sick. You can't skip it, because it's you and me in West Virginia. So it's one of those things that doesn't make sense from an economic perspective or from a marketing perspective. But again, it's an adventure, and it's fun. So instead of efficiency, consider meaningful adventure. And the second of just 2 suggestions comes from the awareness that these are really privileged conversations that we're able to have. And I think it's fantastic that we can talk about things like what kind of work we would like to do, and how we would like to spend our time, and what blogs we read. And so it's great, but it's also very unusual. It's very remarkable, and it's very privileged, to be able to talk about these things. And so something that I think is missing, from the whole conversation about alternative life and work, is this question of contribution. The question, what can we contribute, instead of just what can we consume, or how can we engage instead of detach. And so that's why I say that the 2 most important questions in the universe are, number 1, what do you really want to get out of life? Because a lot of people don't know what they want. So I think if they can figure that out, that's great. But then number 2, what can you offer the world that no one else can? So that's that question of contribution, the question of engagement. And it's good to say, when we talk about contribution, it's not entirely a selfless act. It's not a sacrificial thing, at least not entirely, because we ourselves benefit, as we contribute, and we ourselves are made better as we seek to answer that question of contribution. So it's good for everyone. And my story is, after 9/11, I was depressed like everyone else, and just asking myself the big questions of life. And my wife and I are talking about, like, what can we do, and is there a way we can respond? How can we do something to give back? And it was out of that situation that we ended up moving to West Africa and living in Sierra Leone and Liberia for about 4 years, volunteering for a medical charity. And it was just the most amazing, transformative experience of our lives. It was very good for us. And we would come back to the States every year or so, and we would talk with people about what we were doing. And people would say things like, oh, that's amazing. How sacrificial of you. And we realized pretty quickly, to become uncomfortable with that kind of dialogue, because we would say, oh, it is great, that we can do this. And it is wonderful that we can be a part of something bigger than ourselves, and that we can help an organization that's working in post-war, post-conflict countries, and that's good. And people's lives are being made better through that. But, it's not the whole story. The whole story is that our lives are being made better through this also. And we are also being changed. So really, this is the best decision that we've ever made, And so that's why I call it almost, it's like a selfish generosity. As we seek to answer that question of contribution, then we ourselves are made better. So when you put all these things together, along with this opportunity to embrace life as a meaningful adventure instead of something to be lived to its most efficient state all the time, along with the imperative to really think about contribution, to think about what we can give and how we can engage. I think what it all comes down to is a question of legacy, of what will our legacy be, and what are we building, and what kind of story do we hope to tell with our lives, and what will the ultimate impact of our lives be. And I think of legacy as having nothing to do with money, nothing to do with inheritance, even career. It's certainly nothing that we think about at the end of our lives, looking back when we can't really make any changes. But rather, legacy is something to think about from whatever stage, in our life we're in. And I think it's a question of influence and relationships, and that part of contribution that I talked about. And so that's what I've been trying to do with the Art of Non-Conformity, with the blog, now the book, the business, the whole community. I like to be very clear that it's been a work in progress from the beginning, and it continues to be. I wasn't very clear about the project in the beginning, and that's normally how it goes. I began with the classic blogging strategy of making shit up. I'm sure no one at Google is familiar with that, but that's how I started. And fortunately, a number of people came along and engaged and contributed and participated and asked good questions and made the project so much better than it would have been just with me. And so I'm extremely grateful for that, and I consider myself extremely fortunate to have responsibility for this community. And just to let you know two very quick things for those of you who are interested. The first thing is that this book is actually a partnership with my friends at Charity Water, and we're working with 2 communities in Ethiopia to bring clean water and sanitation. And so if you get the book in any form, print or digital, if you just write your name down on this notebook today, and then all the money that I get for the book will go to the project in Ethiopia. And the second thing is, as I've been doing these meetups all over the country, I realized that the best thing about the whole event, the whole space, is not this formal time, where I'm talking, but really all of the other people who come out, and the before and the after space. So I was trying to think, how can we scale this experience? How can we do this? How can we bring remarkable people together, not just from one city, but from all over the world? And so I created the World Domination Summit, which I'm hosting next June in Portland, Oregon. And I've rented out the Portland Art Museum, and I'm working with a great team to bring together speakers and workshop leaders. It's going to be very participatory, and so if you're interested in that, then I have an invitation for you. But mostly, I always want to say that I get paid in nice emails and in blog trackbacks, and so I'm so grateful for everyone who's been a part of the project, and if you're new, that's great too. Whenever I see people writing about the Art of Non-Conformity, I just have the same feeling, that I would have of getting paid, so very grateful for that. And the last thing I want to say before we can do the questions and attempted answers, and then we'll hang out, is I always like to talk to people about their own projects, about their own blogs and businesses and adventures and things. And on this tour so far, I've been hearing from a lot of people thinking about starting something. And the question or the topic varies quite a bit in terms of what they're thinking about starting or what they're thinking about doing. But I have noticed this common theme. And the common theme is, I worry I'm too late. I worry I'm too late to do this. So if it's a business idea, I worry that the marketplace has passed me by. If it's something else, maybe I just worry that I'm too late in life. I should have done this, years ago or whatever. And I think it's really interesting because I always say it's good to do market research. It's good to think about your motivations and understand, what you really want to do and if you're going to stick with it. And all those things are great. But I also realize that that's exactly how I felt 3 years ago when I started the Art of Non-Conformity. And I looked around at lots of other successful bloggers and authors, and I thought, do I really have a unique message to share? And I should have started this a long time ago. And so there's all this fear and insecurity and anxiety, and somehow I managed to overcome that. And I'm so glad I did, because now here we are together, and now there's this book tour, and now the project is so much bigger than what it was. And I'm very grateful for that. So I always say when someone asks, what is the best time to start? I always say the best time to start was last year, but failing that, today will do. So I'm happy to share, whatever it is I've learned about unconventional life, work, and travel along the way. And I know I'm among a great community of people who know all about starting things, but mostly I would encourage you as well to find a way to share your story with those who can benefit from it. And thanks so much for having me here on stop number 46 of the Unconventional Book Tour. So, questions and attempted answers. with the microphone.
Hi, Chris. My name is James. Thanks for coming here and doing this talk. So I think I looked a little bit at your blog yesterday, and you talk about traveling long-term and also making money on the side. And on one hand, I also saw something about AdWords and AdSense arbitrage. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, I can probably explain how I got started as an entrepreneur and then the transition to the blog. So thanks, James, for the great question. I got started as an entrepreneur about 10 years ago. I just discovered that I wasn't a good employee. I was unemployable, basically. It's a long story. I go into it in the book. But my motivation in the beginning was, how can I find a way to support myself? I don't necessarily need to get rich, but how can I find a way to, support myself without working for someone else? So I would say it's kind of a low-level motivation. I started a coffee importing business. I started selling things on eBay way back in the day when eBay was new. Then I was a designer for a while. And then I realized I was a good designer in 1999. And things have changed a little bit, so now I work with a great designer partner. But I did a number of things with Google AdWords also in the early days. I did affiliate marketing, and I created information products and all of that. So I had kind of a scattered history as an entrepreneur. I never built a big company or anything. It was mostly like my motivation, again, was to support myself. And my wife and I went overseas for 4 years, and I was able to do that without taking a salary from the organization. So that was great. But then I moved back to the States 2006, and I realized I had done a number of things that were somewhat interesting to some people, but they were all kind of unrelated. So I wanted to create convergence. I felt like I'd been an entrepreneur, I'd been an aid worker, I had this travel thing I was starting to do where I was trying to visit every country, but I had no platform. And so that's kind of that was where where the Art of Non-Conformity came from. And in terms of the monetization with the site, that was also a very organic thing. I get a lot of credit for being strategic, and it's totally false. Really, in the beginning, I had no monetization plan at all. And what I found was, as the project grew, I kept getting a lot of the same questions, a lot of technical questions about how I do my travel, about round-the-world plane tickets and frequent flyer miles and travel hacking, and then also about micro businesses and entrepreneurship on a very small scale. And so I just decided to create additional resources for sale for those who wanted that. And I tried to be very clear, in the beginning, and still am, that I do most of my work for free. 80%, 90% of the work is for free. And then the 10% or 20% is there for people who want it. So I kind of built that store up along the way. And now unconventionalguides.com, which is the related side business to Art of Non-Conformity, is really how I make a living and how I support myself. But I basically what I've tried to do is listen to my community, and I've tried to understand what they want and what resources they're looking for, what needs that they have, and try to then find a way to meet those needs. And that's how the monetization has come about. There's a long line here at the question, but just try to make your way through.
Hi, Chris. I feel that most of the time, the best catalyst for action is inspiration. And I feel as if inspiration is something you get from role models. But growing up, I feel I've been let down by most of my role models, especially public figures. So in order to non-conform, what are your thoughts on where I can find role models to inspire me?
What kind of role model are you looking for?
It's a purposely vague question.
Okay.
I feel as if I want to do something big, I would need a feeling of wanting to be like someone.
Okay.
And so in one sense, perhaps the leaders of this company are my role models for how I would lead a company.
That's great. What was your name?
Matthias.
Matthias. Okay,
Yes.
Thanks. That was a good question. I'm just thinking about how to answer it. It's not purposely vague. I think I also take inspiration from people, and I don't know if I would say they're role models. I mean, maybe they are. I would just say I like hearing the stories of other people who've done different things or have overcome something, or have pursued a big project, a big dream, and hopefully found a way to connect that dream with the lives of other people. So I guess even if I was to feel let down by someone, hopefully there's still something in their life that I can look up to and derive inspiration from. And part of the project, something I've tried to be very careful about is to maintain what I call an anti-guru philosophy. So I try very hard. I mean, sometimes people ask me specific questions about, their own lives and their careers and what they're trying to do. And if I can be helpful in that, I will. But I don't want to, I don't have any claim that I can provide the answer. So I always try to reflect back on people. So I still take a lot of inspiration from the people who read the site and the stories, that they send me. And I take inspiration from other bloggers, other authors, and then not just people who are public figures, but people who are doing fun things. So I guess I don't, I'm not looking for one role model, or one big person that I say I want to emulate that person, but I try to take something, from a variety of people. And then, you look at that person's life and you say, what do I like about this, and how can I adapt this, or how can I apply this characteristic to me? And then obviously not everything about them will relate to you, so maybe you take something from someone and something from someone else, and then hopefully at some point that's where your identity comes from.
Hi, I'm Shubha. So my question is, the older I get and the more stuff I have accumulated and the more relationships I have, like my husband, my kids, it's harder and harder to do unconventional things. I mean, mostly like travel, things like that. Those are in my head. I would love to do that, but I don't get to do a lot of those things. So what advice would you have for someone in my situation?
Okay, great. So, one of the things that's really helped in the beginning, as I said, like people came along and asked good questions. I started by writing about my own trips, and then people would say things like, well, I don't want to travel, or I'm not able to travel right now. Isn't nonconformity bigger than that? Of course, the answer is yes. So I had to kind of, back up a little bit. What I've tried to do recently is to look at people in different situations and to look at families, for example, because this comes up a lot. And some families, do want to travel and have some kind of international adventure, and some don't, and either way is fine. For those who do want that, then there are examples of people who've done that, and a number of people, have been able to have a big adventure. There's a story in the book of a family who goes by the name Soul Travelers 3. So they are soultravelers3.com or soultravelers3 on Twitter. And they've been raising their 5-year-old daughter, who I think is now 8 or 9. They've been living in a number of different countries, and they make about $24,000 a year. And they have a blog where they talk about how they do that, and the choices that they've made and the priorities that they've chosen, above other priorities to make happen. But then the other thing is, whether you want to travel or not, I think these are good conversations to have as a family. And it's good to talk as a family or a couple or whatever your situation is and say, okay, what are your dreams? What are my dreams? And it's okay for us, if some of those dreams are different, that's okay. But maybe there's also a shared experience we can create. Maybe there's something we want to do as a family. And then, I like to reverse engineer things and say, okay, this is my goal. This would be fun. How can we make this happen? How do we step back from that and figure out everything that needs to happen, for that to take place? So I was talking with Jenny earlier today about her upcoming book launch and all of her plans for that. And I'm sure she'll share about that at some point. But we were talking about what she wanted to make happen and what needed to take place, to make that come about. So I think it's good to have conversations. I think it's good to have, joint planning sessions. It's good to find a way to support each other's dreams. What's up?
Hi, Chris. I'm Ryan.
Hey, man.
Speaking of families, I was curious what your upbringing was like that pushed you into this obsession with nonconformity.
About my upbringing. Well, I lived, I had a split family like a lot of people do. And so I had basically 2 sets of families I was growing up with. And my mom was married to a guy in the Air Force, so we kind of moved around a lot. Lived in the Philippines for a couple of years as a child, which I didn't enjoy so much as a kid. I was like 6 to 9 growing up, and I was separated from my dad, who was back in the States. So I didn't enjoy that so much then, but I think in the long term it was good, a good cross-cultural experience. And then I wasn't a very good student. I'm actually a high school dropout. I talk about that in the book. I went to 1 year of high school and then just left, and I ended up going to college after that. So I guess, in some ways I had privileges, in other ways I wasn't, I was kind of a rebel or, anti-authoritarian in some ways.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks, man.
Let me start with this one. What sort of mental techniques do you use to try to quelch risk aversion? So, if you're going on a trip around the world and you've got, this stuff in your backpack and this amount of money in the bank, there's certainly scenarios that you could get yourself in where you're in trouble. So you or other people that you've read, what sort of techniques do you use to say, you know, I'm really ready to do this. I'm as safe as I can be. Let's just go for it.
That's a great question. What was your name?
Jeremy.
Jeremy, thanks. That was awesome. I don't know if I have any mental techniques, but I guess what I try to do and what I encourage people to do is think about risk differently and maybe redefine risk a little bit. So, you know, the example of travel, this comes up a lot. People always ask me about dangerous countries and bad things that have happened and, you know, aren't you scared, et cetera. And I always point out that there are some dangerous countries in the world, yes, but the list is very, very small. Basically like 5 to 10, you know, countries in the world that actually could be called dangerous, and there's 180 countries, you know, which are totally fine, right? So I also say the more you do something, then the more comfortable you become. You know, when the risk comes about, or the feeling of risk, or the fear, usually comes about when we haven't done something, and you know, we're thinking about doing something, but we don't know what it's like. Once we get the experience, we kind of look back and say, oh, you know, maybe not so much. The other thing I would say about risk is, in terms of entrepreneurship, small business, working for companies, you know, traditionally, security has been defined as, you know, working for a company. And entrepreneurship is seen as the risky alternative. And entrepreneurs take risks. You know, therefore, they are rewarded for their risks, or they might fail. And I think, you know, a lot of what's happened, you know, over the past few years has kind of redefined that. And I think a lot of beliefs have been questioned. And, you know, we used to have the belief that the stock market is always going to go up. We used to have the belief that home ownership is the best choice for everyone. And I think, you know, more and more people are looking at that and saying, okay, what is risk and what is security? You know, in my case, I think it would be risky for me to have a job. You know, I think working for myself is the less risk. I think it's the safe, conservative choice, right? So people often talk about risk in the sense of starting a business, but it can actually be a very safe choice. So I like to think about risk and think about what the real risk is and maybe redefine it.
Hi, Chris. My name's Dan. I'm interested because a lot of bloggers that I read, you know, who have this sort of message, like, you know, do your own thing, like, live your own life, tend to make money from their blogs, or an associated online business. And obviously, you're doing some of that.
Sure.
But you've also done some other things, like you mentioned the coffee importing business and some designing and stuff. So I'm not going to ask, you know, what job should you do if you're interested in this, but I'm interested in what kind of feeling you get when you do these sort of jobs, and what is it that that makes you think, like what's the kind of feeling you get when you're like, oh, I should keep doing this. This is going well, versus, oh, I should drop this and try something different.
Okay, good. So a couple of different questions there. I would say in terms of the feeling I get, and maybe you're asking like what motivates me, or what do I find you know, encouragement. I would say the encouragement is mostly through, you know, the daily engagement with what I call the small army of remarkable people. You know, so the people who are a part of the community, both online and offline. You know, so every day, you know, I get a lot of emails, just like all of you do, and many of the emails are people talking about sharing their own story and sharing, you know, what they're doing that's unconventional or different, and how they're overcoming pressure, and how our lives are connected. And I find that very motivating. I find that very encouraging, and as I said earlier, inspiring to me. Now, as to what other people should do, I mean, that's a big, broad question. I mean, I guess I always, you know, I think a couple of things. One, I think it's very difficult to do something on a long-term basis that you're not motivated to do. I think it's much easier to, you know, it's much easier to do what you're motivated to do as opposed to trying to motivate yourself into something. You know, we all have things we have to do, like suck it up, get it done. But I think, you know, if that's your career, then that's very difficult. You know, so as much as possible, you know, again, for those of us, you know, in a relatively privileged setting, as much as possible, I think it's good to, you know, forge your life and your career around things that you're motivated to do and things you're excited about. And in terms of blogging, whether you want to have a commercially successful blog, or just a blog that's popular, or just a blog that, you know, a few people read, the question is to answer is always, why should other people care about this, and what's in it for them, and what are their needs, and how are you providing a solution to their needs? And if you do that, then people will be interested in it. If not, probably not so much. Yeah. And did you want to have a follow-up?
Oh, and I just, you know, sorry, you know, I guess it's kind of a vague question, but I guess I'm most interested in the motivation thing. Like, when you start something new, is there a lot of well, I got to push through and do this grunt work and that grunt work until I get there? Or do you find that when you find a groove, you really hit it and you're motivated from the start?
For the most part, I enjoy almost everything I do. For the most part, I enjoy the process of creating. I enjoy the process of responding. I guess, again, with the motivations, what I'm interested in at this point is influence, and how can we grow the community in a scalable way that, makes sense and is appropriate, not too fast, not too slow. But for the most part, I love what I do. I mean, I have a great life. I'm very grateful. Thanks.
I'm Jen. I was wondering if you have any advice on how to know when to let a project go and how to do so without feeling guilty. I've been writing a blog for a few years and I have, a few hundred followers. I don't want to let them down, but I'm not gathering as much fulfillment from writing the blog anymore.
Okay.
But I continue to do it out of not letting.
You do it out of
people
obligation?
down. Yeah.
Okay. Well, have you considered maybe having a dialogue, with those readers or followers, and maybe just expressing your feelings? I mean, this is something that's actually, blog readers respond very well, to, expressions of your personal motivation and, what you're feeling in terms of fulfillment. So it's almost the kind of thing where, if I felt that situation, I would try to think a bit myself and think, okay, why am I feeling this way? I was excited about this before, but something changed. What changed? Is there a way that we can, recreate what I had before, or is it just time to move on and do something else? And if that's the case, then that's fine. But it may also be helpful to, instead of just focusing inwardly, one question that people always ask when you're trying to figure out what to do, and a lot of life coaches encourage people to ask themselves the question, what excites you? So I think that's good. I think it's good, but I think it's only a good start. So I think you think about what excites you, but also what bothers you. What bothers you about the world. And so that's a little bit more of an external focus. So in this case, maybe having a dialogue with the readers or the community and just sharing what you just shared and saying, I was really excited about this for a while, but now some things have changed in my life, or maybe I'm, motivated by different things. What do you think about that? And I think I might change the project entirely, or I might start a new one, but let's have a conversation about it.
Hi, Chris. I'm wondering, what advice would you give for gaining the understanding of families in our pursuits of nonconformity or just motivation and happiness? I'm speaking particularly to living in a different place, traveling abroad. What is a good balance, and how do we achieve it between being happy with our lives and getting other people to understand that we're happy with our lives?
Right. That's a very good question. And maybe we should actually end with this question, and then I'm going to hang out in the back for anybody else who wants to talk or sign a book. There's a number of things we could say about that. I guess when we talk about resistance and pressure to conform, it often comes from family or close friends who don't understand why we want to do something. And I think often what is the case, especially in terms of travel or living somewhere else, like you mentioned, I think there's a fear that you're going to leave and never come back. And so sometimes it's an irrational fear, or it's a fear that something is going to be different or changed. And so sometimes it helps just to do something, right? Or to go on a trip or whatever, and then you come back, and then people say, oh, okay, he went away and then he came back, and he's still the person, the son, the brother, the husband, the partner, whoever that I knew before. And so I would say in many cases, people just get used to things over time. If you spend your life trying to persuade people to go along, you may be successful, but you could spend years doing that, or you could just step out a little bit, and then, hopefully people will adjust. And often that resistance comes out of fear and envy or jealousy, and maybe people want to do something themselves, but they haven't been able to, or they don't see how they can do it. So what's fun is by doing that, by actually stepping out and pursuing whatever the unconventional choice is, in your case, what's fun is that you can then be an inspiration to them. And they're not going to read books about nonconformity. They don't read blogs, but they know you, and you're part of their life. So if you've done that, then you're an inspiration, and hopefully maybe they'll take a step as well. We could say a lot more about that, but I think our time is up here, unless there's one more question. Jenny, did you want to say anything else? That's good. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to be at Rocket Room in San Francisco tonight at 7 p.m. But thank you.